Ferrari just exposed something in Bahrain that no broadcast showed you. Not just a fast lap. Not just testing hype. A performance spike so aggressive that rival teams immediately began checking their own data twice. 1 minute 34.273. 4/10ths clear of the field. Nearly 200 meters gained on the straight before Red Bull even reached peak speed. 200 meters. That is not marginal. That is domination. But here is the part that changes everything. The SF-26 did that while visibly clipping energy before the end of the straight. Which means this car is already brutally fast. And it is still not optimized. Add a radical V-shaped diffuser generating massive downforce. An ultra-aggressive hybrid deployment strategy. And an aerodynamic system now under quiet FIA scrutiny. This is not a normal test result. This is a potential power shift. Because if Ferrari smooths the torque mapping before the first race, the gap does not shrink. It explodes. Subscribe now. Because once you see what the data really says about Day 2 in Bahrain, you will understand why teams were not impressed. They were worried. Let's break down what actually happened in that lap. Because the shock was not just the time. It was how the time was created. When Charles Leclerc crossed the line with a 1 minute 34.273, the margin looked strong. 4/10ths to the next fastest car. But margins can lie. Data does not. And the data from Sector 1 is where the real story begins. The SF-26 did not gradually build speed down the main straight. It launched. The acceleration curve was steeper than Red Bull. Steeper than McLaren. Ferrari released electrical deployment earlier, and more aggressively. The car reached maximum velocity almost 200 meters before its closest rival. 200 meters. That is a decision. That is not coincidence. Ferrari is front-loading hybrid energy. They are choosing to dominate the first half of the straight. Why is that so important? Because whoever wins the first half of the straight controls the braking zone. And whoever controls the braking zone controls the fight. In qualifying trim, that strategy is lethal. You create separation instantly. You force the car behind into reaction mode. But here is the detail that changes the narrative. After that violent surge, the energy assistance begins to taper. Clipping appears earlier than rivals. The Ferrari looks unstoppable at the beginning of the straight, and slightly exposed at the end. That tells us something critical. Ferrari is extracting peak performance at the expense of sustained deployment. They are operating near the limit of efficiency. Over one lap, that is a weapon. Over a race distance, that is a gamble. Now imagine if that clipping is mainly a software calibration issue. If torque mapping can be smoothed. If deployment timing can be optimized. If battery temperature management improves slightly. Suddenly the early straight dominance remains, and the late straight weakness disappears. That is why rival teams were not celebrating Ferrari's clipping. They were analyzing it. Because this is not a slow car finding time. This is a fast car that is not fully refined yet. And in Formula 1, a fast car with room to improve is far more dangerous than a perfect car with no ceiling left. That was block 1. And it already reveals something uncomfortable for the rest of the grid. Now let's move to the long runs. Because this is where the brutal truth begins to surface. Lewis Hamilton stepped into the car for the afternoon session. Higher fuel. Hotter conditions. A proper race simulation program. And almost immediately, the tone inside the Ferrari garage shifted. The raw speed was still there. But the rhythm was not. Out of slow corners, the torque delivery felt sharp. Almost aggressive to the point of instability. The rear tires had to absorb a sudden surge of electrical power. And then, halfway down the straight, that surge began to fade. Strong. Then flat. Over one lap, that characteristic feels exciting. Over 30 or 40 laps, it becomes exhausting. Because drivers depend on predictability. They depend on consistent braking markers. They depend on stable throttle response. And when the energy deployment changes mid-straight, everything shifts. This is where things get serious. The hybrid system appears to be draining energy very aggressively under maximum attack. That explains the explosive Sector 1 advantage. But it also explains the visible clipping toward the end of longer stints. And in race trim, that is dangerous. Because if Ferrari must lift and coast to preserve battery life, they become vulnerable on the very straights they dominate in qualifying. Red Bull will not hesitate. McLaren will not hesitate. Now here is the detail that truly unsettles rival engineers. This does not look like a hardware limitation. It looks like mapping, software refinement, torque smoothing, which means it can be improved quickly, very quickly. And if Ferrari solves that before the first race, the car keeps its brutal acceleration, without the late straight weakness. That combination would be devastating. Add to that the narrow aerodynamic operating window we discussed earlier. When ride height is perfect, the V-shaped diffuser generates massive downforce. The car looks planted, precise. But when crosswinds hit, or when the car rides a curb aggressively, airflow can stall. Rear grip drops suddenly. That sensitivity increases pressure during long runs. But again, it is not a fundamental flaw. It is a refinement challenge. This is what the brutal pace really reveals. Ferrari is operating at the edge of performance. The ceiling is extremely high. The margin for error is extremely small. And in Formula 1, a car like that can either collapse under race conditions, or become unstoppable once the fine-tuning is complete. That is why Day 2 did not feel like ordinary testing. It felt like the first glimpse of something powerful, and slightly dangerous. But there is another layer to this story that almost nobody is discussing. The internal split inside Ferrari. Because the SF-26 is not just fast. It is selective. It rewards one driving style more than the other. And that creates tension. Charles Leclerc naturally extracts performance from a sharp front end and a mobile rear. He thrives on rotation. He attacks corner entry aggressively. He uses that slight instability to pivot the car and maximize traction on exit. In sectors 1 and 3, that approach looks spectacular. Heavy braking. Strong traction zones. That is where he dominates. But Lewis Hamilton approaches performance differently. He prefers stability at entry. He builds speed progressively. He trusts a platform that remains calm over bumps and crosswinds. And the data from comparable laps shows something fascinating. Hamilton appeared stronger in the flowing middle sector, managing weight transfer with precision, smoother inputs, less dramatic rotation, which means the car has potential in both styles, but not simultaneously. Not yet. No one has unlocked a configuration that combines Leclerc's explosive sectors with Hamilton's long-run consistency in a single, perfect run. And this is where development becomes critical. Every adjustment to calm the rear slightly reduces the aggression that created that headline lap. Every change to smooth torque delivery reduces the sharpness Leclerc exploits. Ferrari is balancing two philosophies inside one machine. That is not a weakness, but it is a challenge. Now add the aerodynamic scrutiny into this equation. The FIA cameras focused heavily on the front wing and floor edge behavior. There are whispers about flexibility under load, about asymmetrical behavior in high-speed corners. If any element of that system must be altered, the balance shifts again. And remember, this car already operates within a narrow window. Remove even a fraction of stability, and the sensitivity increases. But if the system passes review, if the torque mapping is refined, if the energy deployment is extended slightly deeper into the straight, then the brutal pace we saw on Day 2 becomes sustainable. And that is the insane truth after Bahrain testing. Ferrari has not built a comfortable car. They have built a high-ceiling car. A machine capable of incredible qualifying speed. Exceptional slow corner traction. Massive diffuser downforce when conditions align. An aggressive hybrid deployment that shocks rivals. The weaknesses are real. Energy clipping. Narrow operating window. Driver preference tension. But none of them look structural. They look solvable. And in Formula 1, a car with solvable weaknesses and extreme pace is the most dangerous combination of all. Day 2 was not about perfection. It was about potential. And potential, when paired with brutal pace, is exactly what shifts championships. And now we reach the moment where everything connects. Because when you step back and look at the full picture from Day 2 in Bahrain, the brutal pace of the SF-26 stops looking random. It starts looking intentional. Ferrari did not accidentally create this performance spike. They designed a car that operates at the edge. An edge of hybrid deployment. An edge of aerodynamic load. An edge of mechanical balance. And when all three align, the result is explosive. That is what we saw in the morning session. Low fuel. Soft tires. Maximum deployment. Perfect ride height. And in that narrow window, the car looked untouchable. But Formula 1 championships are not won inside narrow windows. They are won across changing conditions. Wind shifts. Track evolution. Fuel burn-off. Tire degradation. And that is where the insane truth becomes clear. Ferrari has built a car with a very high ceiling, but also a very sharp floor. If they fall outside the ideal setup range, performance drops quickly. If energy deployment is even slightly mismanaged, clipping appears. If rear ride height changes over a stint, diffuser sensitivity increases. That is not weakness. It is volatility. And volatility can either break a season, or define it. Because here is what truly matters. None of the current concerns look permanent. The hybrid issue appears to be mapping related. The torque delivery can be smoothed through software refinement. Battery management can be optimized. Ride height sensitivity can be mitigated with setup work and aerodynamic fine-tuning. These are solvable problems. What is much harder to engineer is raw speed. And Ferrari clearly has raw speed. They have pole position pace. They have exceptional traction out of slow corners. They have a diffuser concept capable of generating massive load when conditions are correct. They have a hybrid system aggressive enough to shock the grid. And that combination is what left rival teams quiet at the end of day 2. Not panic. Not celebration. Silence. Because every engineer in that paddock understands one simple principle. If a car is already this fast before being fully optimized, the development curve becomes frightening. That is the brutal truth after Bahrain testing. Ferrari did not reveal a finished masterpiece. They revealed potential dominance. A concept with extreme upside. A machine that, once refined, could control qualifying sessions and dictate race strategy. But it all comes down to one thing. Can they widen the operating window without sacrificing the aggression that makes it special? Can they smooth the torque delivery without losing that violent acceleration? Can they protect the rear tires without dulling the edge? If the answer is yes, the balance of power shifts. If the answer is no, this becomes a car that dazzles on Saturday and struggles on Sunday. That is the crossroads Ferrari now faces. And that is why day 2 in Bahrain felt different. It was not just testing. It was a glimpse of what could become the most dangerous car on the grid. Not because it is perfect, but because it is brutally fast. And still evolving.